Are African leaders like Ibrahim Traoré dictators?
If we don't respect ourselves, nobody is going to respect us. You know?
For Russia-Africa Summit, we have made a decision very respectfully as heads of state in Africa that any engagement with other partners must be an engagement of equals.
Leaders in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali are being labeled as such. But why? Simply because they refuse to allow Western intervention. They've outright rejected all forms of foreign involvement. Their mission is singular and clear: to achieve true independence for Africa. They're willing to put their lives on the line for this cause. So, are they patriots or are they dictators? Let's find out. When an entire region rises and says, "Enough is enough," the world should take notice. West Africa is doing just that, and in doing so, they are rewriting the rules of engagement in geopolitics. This is not merely a series of military coups. It is a revolution, a reckoning, and most importantly, a reclamation of what rightfully belongs to Africa: its resources, its sovereignty, and its future. Over the last few years, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have undergone seismic shifts in their political landscapes. Military generals have toppled governments and taken power, severing ties with the Western-backed economic community of West African states, ECOWAS, and forming their own alliance of Sahel states. This alliance signals more than just political realignment. It is a declaration that Africa will no longer play second fiddle to foreign powers who have, for centuries, exploited its people and resources. And what sparked West Africa's defiance? The defiance we are witnessing in West Africa today is not a spontaneous outburst. It has been decades, no, centuries in the making. West Africa's rejection of the status quo results from mounting frustration over economic exploitation, military intervention, and political interference by Western powers, particularly France and the United States. In the wake of colonialism's collapse in the mid-20th century, African nations were promised independence, self-governance, and economic prosperity. Instead, what they got was a different kind of colonization: neo-colonialism. Western powers, through economic organizations like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, imposed crippling financial conditions on African nations. Loans were provided, but they came with strings attached: austerity measures, privatization of state assets, and policies that catered to Western corporations instead of local development. The result? A cycle of debt, poverty, and stagnation that benefited only a select few. ECOWAS, which was founded in 1975 to promote economic cooperation and self-reliance among West African nations, soon became another tool in the West's neo-colonial playbook. Initially seen as a symbol of African unity, ECOWAS instead became a mechanism through which Western powers could maintain control over the region. Economic sanctions, military interventions, and political pressure were all leveraged to ensure that West African nations remained under the thumb of the West. But something changed in the early 2000s. The people of West Africa began to see through the lies. They watched as foreign troops, primarily from France and the United States, occupied their land under the pretext of fighting insurgents. They saw how their natural resources, gold, uranium, and oil, were being extracted and shipped off to Europe and North America, while they received little in return. Western promises of development, security, and stability ran hollow as poverty and jihadist insurgencies continued to rise. For the military generals who now lead Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, enough was enough. They seized power not just to oust corrupt civilian leaders, but to put an end to the systemic exploitation of their countries. These generals understood that real change could not come from working within the same broken system. So they took the bold step of breaking free from ECOWAS, effectively severing the neo-colonial chains that had bound them for so long. The defiance we see today is rooted in a deep desire for sovereignty, real sovereignty. West African nations no longer want to be dependent on Western handouts, nor do they want to be pawns in the geopolitical chess game between global superpowers. They want to control their resources, build their economies, and secure their futures, and they are willing to risk it all to achieve that. This leads us to the creation of the Alliance of Sahel States, a direct challenge to the old order and a bold move toward African self-determination. But what does this new alliance represent, and how will it reshape the region? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The Alliance of Sahel States is more than just a reaction to ECOWAS's failure to address the needs of its member states. It is a proactive step toward building a new African order. It is the embodiment of a vision in which African nations cooperate not as puppets of foreign powers but as equal partners, working together to achieve common goals. One of the primary reasons these nations decided to break away from ECOWAS was the bloc's inability to protect its members from the external pressures exerted by the West. ECOWAS, with its lofty promises of regional integration and self-reliance, has instead acted as a gatekeeper for Western economic interests. It imposed harsh sanctions on Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso after their military takeovers, not because these coups were a threat to African stability, but because they were a threat to Western influence. Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso saw through this charade. They understood that if they were to achieve true sovereignty, they needed to create a new framework, one that would not be beholden to foreign powers. The Alliance of Sahel States was born out of this necessity. It is an alliance rooted in African interests, focused on addressing the challenges that matter most to the people of the region: economic development, security, and control over natural resources. Unlike ECOWAS, which has been slow to respond to the insurgencies that have plagued the Sahel region for over a decade, the Alliance of Sahel States has made security a top priority. The leaders of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have committed to pooling their military resources to combat the growing threat of insurgencies. This is a significant shift from the past when African nations relied on foreign troops to handle their security challenges. By taking matters into its own hands, the Alliance of Sahel States is sending a clear message. Africa will no longer outsource its security to foreign powers, but security is only one aspect of the alliance's agenda. The ASS also aims to foster economic cooperation among its members, particularly in the areas of energy and infrastructure development. Niger, for example, is one of the world's largest producers of uranium, a resource that is critical for global energy production. By controlling its uranium production and setting terms for its export, Niger can leverage its resources to strengthen its economy and reduce its dependence on foreign aid. Burkina Faso and Mali, both rich in gold, are also looking to harness their resources for the benefit of their people, rather than allowing foreign mining companies to extract wealth while leaving behind environmental degradation and economic inequality. Through the ASS, these nations are exploring ways to collaborate on infrastructure projects that will facilitate the movement of goods and services across borders, creating a more integrated and self-sufficient regional economy. This strategic realignment away from ECOWAS and toward a more autonomous, Africa-centric alliance has caught the attention of global powers. But why are African nations increasingly turning toward Russia and China? To understand why West African nations are aligning themselves with Russia and China, we must first acknowledge the failure of the West to treat Africa as an equal partner. For far too long, Western countries have viewed Africa as a resource-rich continent to be exploited, rather than a geopolitical player with its interest and agency. Russia and China, on the other hand, are offering African nations something that the West has never truly provided: respect. While Western powers often cloak their interventions in Africa under the guise of humanitarian aid, democracy promotion, or counterinsurgency, their underlying motives have always been economic and strategic. African leaders are acutely aware of this, and they are tired of being patronized. Russia's involvement in Africa is primarily driven by security cooperation. The presence of Russia's private military contractor, the Wagner Group, in countries like Mali and Burkina Faso has been instrumental in providing on-the-ground support for governments struggling to contain jihadist insurgencies. While Western media portrays Wagner as a shadowy mercenary force, African leaders see them as effective partners who deliver results. In contrast to the French and American troops who often operated with little regard for local conditions, Wagner forces work closely with African military leaders, providing them with training, intelligence, and tactical support. But Russia's influence goes beyond military cooperation. Moscow has positioned itself as a champion of anti-colonialism, frequently criticizing Western nations for their historical exploitation of Africa. This resonates deeply with African leaders who are eager to break free from the vestiges of colonialism. By aligning with Russia, these nations are making a statement. They will no longer be subservient to the West. China, on the other hand, has been investing heavily in Africa's infrastructure through its Belt and Road Initiative. China's approach to Africa is pragmatic. It builds roads, railways, ports, and power plants in exchange for access to natural resources. Unlike Western aid, which often comes with political conditions and requires African countries to adopt neoliberal economic policies, Chinese investment is focused on mutually beneficial agreements. African nations see China as a partner that helps them build their economies, not dictate how they should govern themselves. Take, for example, the case of Niger's uranium. For years, French companies had a near monopoly on Niger's uranium production, extracting the resource at bargain prices and exporting it to France to fuel its nuclear energy industry. Meanwhile, Niger's people lived in poverty. Now, with China stepping in to develop new uranium mines, Niger has the leverage to negotiate better terms for its resources, ensuring that more of the wealth generated from uranium stays in Niger. This shift toward Russia and China is also a strategic one. By diversifying their alliances, African nations are no longer dependent on one set of global powers. They have options, and with those options comes leverage. They can play Russia, China, and the West off one another to secure the best deals for their countries. As West Africa strengthens its ties with these new global partners, it is also taking a new approach to one of its most pressing challenges, the fight against insurgencies. So how are these nations handling this threat without Western military intervention? The fight against insurgencies in the Sahel region has been a major focus of Western military intervention over the past decade. France, in particular, has maintained a significant military presence in the region, with thousands of troops stationed in Mali and Niger as part of Operation Barkhane, a counterinsurgency mission aimed at neutralizing insurgent groups. The French and American military operations, while heavily funded and highly publicized, have often failed to address the root causes of extremism: poverty, unemployment, and political disenfranchisement. The military leaders of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso are now taking a different approach, rather than relying on foreign troops to fight their battles. They are working to build their military capacity and develop strategies tailored to the specific challenges of the Sahel. This is where the alliance of Sahel states comes into play. By pooling their resources and coordinating their efforts, these countries are better equipped to combat jihadist insurgencies. One of the key advantages of this new approach is the ability to act quickly and decisively. When foreign troops are involved in counterinsurgency operations, decisions must often go through multiple layers of bureaucracy, with approval required from foreign governments and international organizations. This slows down the decision-making process and can lead to missed opportunities on the battlefield. In contrast, the military leaders of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso can make decisions in real time without the need for external approval. This agility allows them to respond more effectively to the rapidly evolving security landscape in the Sahel. They are also working to integrate local militias and community defense groups into their security strategy, recognizing that local populations are often the first line of defense against jihadist insurgencies. The involvement of Russia's Wagner Group has also been a game changer. Unlike Western troops, who are often bound by strict rules of engagement and political oversight, Wagner forces operate with more flexibility. They can conduct operations in areas where Western troops are restricted, and they have been instrumental in helping local forces regain control of territory previously held by jihadist groups. However, the military approach is only one part of the solution. The leaders of the Alliance of Sahel states understand that the fight against extremism cannot be won through military force alone. They are also focusing on addressing the root causes of radicalization by investing in economic development, education, and infrastructure in the most vulnerable regions. By creating jobs, improving access to education, and providing basic services like healthcare and clean water, these governments are offering young people an alternative to joining extremist groups. This holistic approach to counterinsurgency is a departure from the West's focus on military solutions, and it is already showing promising results. While the fight against insurgencies remains a central concern, the broader geopolitical implications of West Africa's realignment cannot be ignored. What does this mean for the future of Africa and its place in the world? The military takeovers in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso are not isolated incidents. They are part of a broader movement toward African self-determination. For too long, Africa has been treated as a pawn in the global power game, with Western nations dictating its political and economic future. But the tide is turning. Africa is no longer content to be a passive participant in the world order. It is becoming a central player. The implications of this shift are profound. By breaking away from ECOWAS and forming the Alliance of Sahel states, these nations are challenging the established global order. They are rejecting the idea that Africa must always look to the West for guidance and support. Instead, they are charting their path, building alliances with countries that respect their sovereignty and offer mutually beneficial partnerships. This realignment also has significant implications for the global balance of power. As African nations strengthen their ties with Russia and China, the West is losing its grip on a region that has long been a cornerstone of its strategic interests. The United States and Europe, which have relied on African resources to fuel their economies, now face the prospect of losing access to critical minerals like uranium, gold, and rare earth elements. But the consequences go beyond economics. Africa's strategic location and growing population make it a key player in global politics. As the world grapples with issues like climate change, migration, and security, Africa's role will only become more important. The decisions made by African leaders today will shape the future of the continent and the world for decades to come. For Africa, this is an opportunity to redefine its place in the world. By embracing new partnerships and rejecting the old colonial power dynamics, African nations can build stronger economies, more secure borders, and a more prosperous future for their people. The Alliance of Sahel states is just the beginning. Other African nations may soon follow, creating a united front that can stand up to foreign interference and negotiate from a position of strength. For the West, the message is clear. Africa is no longer waiting for permission to chart its course. The old ways of exploitation and domination are over. The world is changing, and Africa is leading that change. So to sum this up, the military takeovers in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso are not signs of chaos. They are declarations of independence. These nations are rejecting the old order, forging new alliances, and taking control of their destinies. Do you believe that as West Africa initiates this shift, other African nations will follow suit? Could this spark a movement towards a united Africa? Let us know in the comment section. Are you prepared for a new wave of Pan-Africanism? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.